Hello everybody, this is Trig coming to you live here on Monday, February 2nd, 2015. Welcome to the Trig podcast of Joy and GOZO TV, where we are going GOZO what? The weather's got you down. You're looking at the brakes in your cars. You're looking at your wallet, at your waistline, wondering what is going on. Don't worry. Let's spend the next few minutes talking about joy, talking about grace, talking about GOZO, talking about going. Today in the Trig podcast of Joy and GOZO TV, we're going to be talking about resting in God. You know, it seems like already here in only the second month of 2015 that people are just stressed out of their minds. Already, all of our plans to have a more peaceful 2015 and to spend our days differently, to take it easy, seems like they're already going out the window, along with our workout plans and eating plans, right? And I think that it makes sense. I mean, we have been through so much as a country, as people. You know, you look at the 2018 or the 2008 economic recession, the Great Recession, and many times we're still dealing with those effects. People are still losing their jobs. People in their 30s and 40s are having to redo their careers. And those that have jobs continue to worry if maybe this is the last year that I will have a steady income. Then we look at our children, and as they're getting older and they're beginning to make choices, we get anxious over their future. And how are they going to make ends meet? Are they going to be okay? We look at our aging parents, and we also wonder what is going to be our role in taking care of them. A lot of things make us feel, as we would say, restless. And there's a great quote by one of my mentors per se. He's a man who was a spiritual father of our faith, St. Augustine. And he said, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." So I want to talk to you today, as I mentioned, about how do we find rest in God. Because there's no doubt that no matter how much we stress over things and all the attempts we make at finding peace in our finances, at work, in our decisions, and all these things, that truly our rest only comes when we look to God. So how do we do that? Well, before I get into that, I wanted to also mention that a lot of times what keeps us from finding rest, it's not just our circumstances, but it's how we respond to those circumstances. We get angry when we feel afraid or we're in crisis. We complain to God or to life, or we get down on ourselves. And so we lose that focus that we had. And so I wanted to take you to Exodus 17 here this morning, where there's a story told of what I call the M&M situation, or the M&M city. There's this story in Exodus 17 of two cities, or two places called Massa and Meribah. So that's the M&M. Massa and Meribah. Everybody say Massa and Meribah. I call it anger and complaint, because truly that's what those words mean. It means quarreling. It means testing. What happened there is that the people of God, instead of looking at how great God had been and how faithful God had been in the past and all the great things he had done, gotten them through the Red Sea and provided quail, food from heaven, manna from heaven, all these great things, instead they complained and they got angry with God and with Moses and all the people. The situation was that they were out in the desert, as they were for many years, and they were thirsty. So they quarreled with Moses, and they said, really what most of us would say when we're in the desert. They would say, "I am thirsty. I need water." If you've been out in the desert, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But here's the thing. It wasn't that their request was wrong. They were thirsty. They were in the desert. That's a normal thing. They didn't want to die. What God was really trying to remind them of was that he wasn't letting them go. He wasn't unaware of their concern. In fact, he had been taking care of them the whole way. Speaking of water, just a few chapters before in Exodus, I think it's 13, Exodus 13, or maybe it was even 16. Check that out. God they had been thirsty, and God had told Moses to put his staff in the river that was bitter. It had bitter water. It was more of a small pond. And this bitter pond became fresh water for them to drink. Again, as I said earlier, God previously, when they were traveling through the heat of the day, had provided a cloud for the people to walk under this cloud. And you know how great it is to have shade in the desert or on a hot day. At night, God had provided a column of fire, not only so they could see, but that snakes and animals and other maybe even people wouldn't just rob them. And most of all, they wouldn't freeze to death, because you know how cold the desert is at night. The point is, God had been faithful. God wasn't saying don't complain per se, or don't be thirsty is what I mean to say. God was saying stop complaining. And most of all, stop wanting to kill and complaining to Moses. He's only been there for you. He's only been reminding you of how good and faithful and gracious I am. But as we do as people, or the people of Israel just complained and they quarreled. And so it says in Exodus 17 that because of that, God was upset, and he didn't let that group of people, that generation, enter the promised land, or as he calls it, or as Exodus says, they didn't enter the rest of God, meaning that place, that resting place, the promised land. You know, anger and complaint are the obstacles to rest. We will never be truly at peace if we live a life of anger and complaint. And we see it everywhere. We see people that just maybe are having a bad day, and immediately they go to anger, they go to complaining, they become the complainers, the haters of our lives. It could be even someone close to us, someone in our lives, in our family. So how do we not fall into that trap of becoming angry and complainers, and instead become people of that can rest in the presence of God? So I have a few tips. First is worship God. Worship him with all of your heart. You know, there in Psalm 95, where it talks about that same story, it starts there saying, "Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation." That's the number one thing we have to do, is to worship God in the middle of our desert, in the middle of our situation. I know that being thirsty or being unemployed, or that being ill or having our children make bad decisions is reason sometimes for us to complain or get angry or get stressed out or anxious. But what God says is, I know that you're worried. I know that you're weary. Worship me. Number two is remember the place God has brought you from. Remember the past. I don't mean remember all the bad things, or how good things used to be. Instead, remember the faithfulness of God. I remember in 2008 how tough it was for our family, for me, to redo my career, to go from working in one place where I had everything, my insurance, my full-time salary, my cell phone benefit, all these fun things, to then, 4 or 5 years later, having to completely redo my life. But guess what happened? God was there. I remember going to hear a pastor in the middle of that situation. It was more like maybe 2010, 2011. And I remember hearing him say, in the desert, God will provide for you. And that's exactly what has happened. It hasn't been easy, but here I am talking to you, having this forum, this platform to speak to you, and so many people are thankful. That's the faithfulness of God. Look back and remember how God has been faithful in your life. Make a list from 2008 to today, and begin to write the top 10 ways that God has been faithful. Number 3, remember that you are loved by God. So much of our anger and our complaining really comes from our loneliness. We feel desperate. We feel like we have to do things on our own. We feel unloved, unsupported. But God, he says here in verse 6 and 7 of Psalm 95, he says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. All that language there is speaking of intimacy. It's talking about oneness. It's talking about relationship with God. God is reminding the people there, I am yours. You are mine. You belong to me. You are my people. I am your God. And in fact, you are the sheep of my hand, which was the most intimate relationship that there was between the shepherd and his sheep. In other words, he's saying, you belong to me. You are mine. You're not alone. And I think that needs to give us so much comfort that when we are hustling and driving on the highway, on the freeway, and trying to make sense of our bills and our bodies and our waistline and our gas and the gas in our car and the brakes in our car, to know that we're loved by God. And you know what? It's not just God. I mean, as if that wasn't enough. We're also loved by people. There are people that love us. Maybe it's your husband or your wife. Maybe it's your mom. Maybe it's your father. You know, and I know a lot of us have difficult or complicated situations with our family members. I'm not saying that everyone feels loved by their family, but really, I think it's important to take time to pause and ask, who loves me? And maybe even to put it in a different way, God loves me. My father, my mother, my family loves me. So it's very important to remember that. And then lastly is to hear the voice of God. To hear the voice of God, you have to soften your heart. You know, you have to basically just be vulnerable. Be honest with yourself and not be so hard. It says here in verse 8, right before that part of that he is our God, verse 7 and verse 8, it says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as you did at Eminem, at Meribah, and at Massa in the wilderness. Do not harden your hearts. It says, Jesus says all the time, anyone who has ears to hear, let them hear what the Spirit has to say. In Matthew 11, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus is constantly saying, soften your hearts. He says, I resist the proud, but I give grace to the humble. In the Old Testament, he says that what God requires is a humble spirit and a contrite heart he will not despise. But you know how many people harden their hearts during tough times? Everyone. It's the natural go-to kind of attitude or response that most of us have. When we're stressed out, when we're lonely, when we're hurt, when someone wrongs us, how do we respond? Or what do we see on TV and the media? Anger and complain. Be different. Soften your heart. Imagine yourself actually, when those things happen, going into your closet, as it says in the Bible, going into your room, into your bedroom, and just being honest with God. Imagine even more calling a friend saying, you know what, I am tempted to just get upset. I'm feeling alone. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling stressed out. But I want to just confess to you, I don't want to be that way. I want to instead be open to God, to hear his voice and to listen to him. And what does he say to you? I'm here for you. I love you. You're mine. You belong to me. I wanted to give you a free practical tools, GOZO Nation and GOZO family, on how we can have more rest in life. Here's number one, take a day off weekly. You know, even God rested. So many times we feel like we have to just go and never stop unless we're ill or we break down or we're depressed, and then we finally take a break. Take a day off. Number two is I use the acronym HALT, H-A-L-T. Whenever I'm hungry, which is what H stands for, A is angry, L is lonely, and T is tired. Whenever I'm any of those things, I try to halt. In other words, don't overreact, but instead take a break, take a deep breath, halt. And then lastly, make an M&M list, meaning the Meribah and Massa list, you know, the anger and complaint list that we all love to keep a mental list of. Make an actual list of that. And you're like, what? Replace it with a gratitude list. I love gratitude lists. It's one of the daily disciplines that has helped me to live a life of joy and a life of GOZO like nothing else. Replace your M&M list. We're all so good. I doubt any of us actually make a list, but we sure have a mental list, and we definitely have mental lips or an M&M mouth. We're constantly telling everyone how angry we are and giving them our complaining list. Replace it with a gratitude list. So for example, instead of saying, oh, I hate traffic, be thankful for gas prices that are going down, that are better than before. Instead of saying, oh, I hate school and homework stresses me out, why don't you instead be grateful that you're young, or the fact that even if you're not young, quote unquote, that you're still learning. Instead of saying, oh, I don't have any money, I'm broke, what about replacing that with the gratitude list of saying, I'm creative. I am being forced to be creative, but this is still an opportunity to come up with something creative. And then lastly, the complaint would be, oh, I have no friends, I'm alone, I have no one loves me. What about replacing that with a gratitude list to say, I'm learning to trust in God and learning to be alone, learning to have maybe just a few close friends. I want to just encourage you, GOZO Nation, to rest in God. As the quote that I read earlier says, we will not truly be rested until we find our rest in God. The quote is, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. Let me know, GOZO Nation, GOZO Head, excuse me. Let me know how you are growing in rest. Let me know how I can help you. Call in, send me an email, trig@davidtrig.com. Go ahead and tweet me or Facebook me your thoughts on what are you doing to bring in more peace into your life, to find rest in your life. I want to ask you something. Here's an interactive question. How many hours of sleep are you getting at night? You can include naps in there, whatever. Something that my dad would always ask me was, son, how are you sleeping? So I want to ask you, GOZO Nation, how are you sleeping? My guess is most of you are saying, I sleep about 3 to 4 hours, or I wake up 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, if that's your answer, then you definitely need to be thinking of implementing some of these tools, being accountable, reaching out, calling on God, and get more rest in your life. Thanks so much for listening, GOZO Nation. Thanks so much for watching. I'm so glad to be here with you. I hope that these programs that I'm here doing once again are helping you. I'm going to do some in Spanish as well, so be looking to that. Please go to my website, davidtrig.com. Go to iTunes to download this podcast. Most of all, just be thankful. Live a life of gratitude, of GOZO, of grace, because God is good. God is great. I thank you for being here. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching, GOZO Nation. Check back in here again tomorrow. I love you. I'm so grateful for you. I'm thankful for you. You can do it. I will see you next time. Goodbye.